This is System Crash, a weekly tech news show willing to tell the hard truths about how tech and the titans who own and operate it is really transforming the world. I'm Paris Marks.
And I'm Brian Merchant.
This system has just begun to crash, so support the show by heading over to patreon.com/systemcrashpod, where you can sign up to get monthly bonus episodes. Also, rate the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Now, the past few weeks, you might have been listening in to our Elon Empower series, where we have been going over the rise of Elon Musk, how he developed the power that he has today by looking back at his earlier history in PayPal, the role of SpaceX and building him up, and what is going on with Tesla and the vulnerabilities that actually his reliance on Tesla creates right now, which I think is an episode that really resonated with people. But we're going to be taking a little break this week and possibly next week before we kind of pick up on some other aspects of that. Brian, I feel like there have been some even real developments in the Tesla story over the past week.
Yeah, there sure have. The Tesla stock story kind of continues to be front and center, and its impact on our Doge overlords' fragile psyche. He gave this interview on Fox News. They're asking him about it. Tesla's stock dip. It's been down pretty continually, barring a brief spike back up.
Yeah, I think I just saw an article the other day that Laura Kolodny, of course, who was on the show, wrote in CNBC.
Shout out to Laura.
Exactly. Laura's great. Saying that in the first quarter, Tesla plunged 36%, its worst performance for any period since 2022, which we love to see, right?
And maybe we'll play a little clip of this, because he's talking about how mean Tim Walz is for bringing this up on stage in one of his speeches.
I mean, you had Tim Walz, who's a huge jerk, running around on stage with the Tesla stock price where the stock price had gone in half, and he was overjoyed. What an evil thing to do! What a creep! What a jerk! Like who derives joy from that?
The irony being, of course, that this is the guy who just weeks ago was just gleefully wielding a chainsaw on stage, celebrating all of the people who he's fired from the federal government, who's tossing out emojis on Twitter or X, the everything app. Just what a portrait of just a guy with sociopathic tendencies, right? This does not compute to him at all that he's just destroying tens of thousands of people's entire livelihoods, could not give a shit. And then the Tesla stock goes down and he's just quivering near tears. He's red-eyed and, oh, my stock price. So how could you do that? What kind of a person does that?
Laughing and trying to make the Tesla stock go down is the most evil thing in the world you could possibly imagine to do. But causing all these people to lose their jobs, being a vehement transphobe who supports far-right movements around the world, that's just normal cool guy stuff.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. That's just online edgelord shit. God, he's just such a stain. He's just such an avatar of late era capitalism, just personified and force fed into us through the feeds. It's nice to be able to talk about this because the Elon series has been great. I feel honestly, I have personally learned so much talking to Max Chafkin about Peter Thiel on the PayPal days, Laura about SpaceX, and Ed about Tesla. So honestly, I do encourage everyone to go listen to those episodes, because it's just these are sort of the three pillars of the origin of Musk, and you could just, it's so much is already there, so much is of the ingredients there. In SpaceX, you can see how the hollowed out state capacity was just sort of ripe for someone to cruise in and do this, and how with Tesla he just sort of manufacturing a mythology of his company and of himself, and that's what he's continued to do ever since. And then a lot of the rawest DNA is from the PayPal days of how he operates and sort of how he brokers deals and how he thinks about things.
Yeah, I can't remember if I mentioned this in one of the interviews because I'm totally blurring and there's been so much going on lately, but there was always this story that really stood out to me from early Elon days, where one of the Canadian financiers, I believe it was, or bank people who he took in to help him get the original X.com started up, the kind of banking app that he made
back
that
in
eventually,
the 90s, late 90s.
Exactly. Yeah, that merged with Confinity, to become PayPal and all that kind of stuff. One of these guys described going into Elon Musk's bedroom in those early days, and there were just business books stacked up all along the wall. And one of the ones on the top was the Richard Branson book. And he said at the time, he was it was so clear that he was trying to figure out how to create this version of himself who was this kind of big business personality, right? To kind of frame himself in this way. And then you very clearly see him making those relationships with media over time in order to promote that. But it was like, this is not just something that came out of nowhere. It did seem like there was like a concerted effort here on his part to try to ensure that he could become one of these like businessman celebrities.
To the point where, like, you know, the outer bounds of that were never realized. And now he wasn't content to just be like the world's entrepreneur man. Now he has to like save the United States, which is how he describes this to himself and on X. And for a story, I was like reading back through some of his tweets, and like he was even in one of the tweets, he's like pretending like he's talking to his young son. It's like, oh, daddy's got to go meet Trump because it's time to save the United States. Like, this is how he's like projecting this. This is what he thinks he's capable of.
And then did he go over to the other account where he pretends to be his child and be like, thank you, daddy, for saving the world or something like that?
Yeah. He's really just been a lot. Let's just say I'm glad we have an episode where we could just kind of talk about this kind of stuff, let it marinate,
and take a little step back from it. You know, I think it's good to do that. Yeah.
And where are you? Right, you're in New Zealand right now.
I'm in nice Auckland, New Zealand. You know, enjoying being down in this part of the world.
You've been jetting all over the place. Where you were in San Francisco before that?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, and I was in Ireland not long before that.
That's right. Looking at the data centers there.
It's been a busy few weeks. Let's put it that way.
Good.
I'm a bit tired. As you can probably hear from my voice, you know, for the listeners, I have a little bit of something on my chest.
A little bit of a cold you caught on one of the planes. Well, that's all right. They can't tell.
Yeah, you know, luckily it's kind of lifting now, which is good. And it's been like quite mild, like it hasn't been too bad. But this relates to what we were talking about, because I was in San Francisco when the big Tesla takedown protests were happening on Saturday, and like in the days leading up to it, I was like, man, I'm so excited. I'm gonna go to this Tesla protest and like see what's
to the
going
global
on
day
there.
of action.
And then I woke up that morning, I was like, oh my God, I feel like shit. And I did not make it out, unfortunately.
Well, hopefully this will help some of our listeners differentiate our voices, because I also want to report that there's a conspiracy theory among some of Paris's diehard fans that I don't exist. In fact, I'm just Paris doing a voice.
Yeah.
Which I love this idea.
This is one of my favorite conspiracy theories I've ever heard in my entire life.
Somebody's like literally like, have you ever seen them in a room together? Yeah. Which we have been in a room. There is, I don't know if there's video. There is video.
I think there would be, at least at one of the times we were together.
Yes, there is at the Luddite Tribunal in San Francisco, or in Oakland,
there
rather.
Absolutely is.
So there's video floating around. So we have that we have to print such an insane thing.
But maybe that video was made in Sora to make people believe.
Deepfaked.
Exactly.
But the idea that you would like, I should really do a spin-off show, and you're like, yeah, it's too much trouble to find a co-host, or like,
I'll just do it myself.
Do a voice. Well, let me hear it. Let me hear your best Brian Merchant impression.
Let me hear it. Let me hear your best Brian. No, see, I can't do like the...
You're too polite. You're too polite
right?
to really, lean into a parody.
I don't know. I would need to practice like your pitch and stuff a little bit more, maybe.
See what a unique snowflake I am.
Yeah.
All those naysayers.
It's that American, I just need to work on it.
But yes, I'm sorry that your illness prevented you from going out, because it was good fun. I did join a Tesla takedown protest in West LA, and it was a vibrant crowd.
Oh, I even heard from people who were at the San Francisco one and said it was great, and I was like, I wish I could have been there.
Yeah, I mean, it's just there were vanishingly few opportunities to sort of like get out there and feel good about something with all that's going on with the onslaught of authoritarianism and the dismantling of the government over here. So, I mean, that's what protest is all about, and that's why it's so important. You go out there and link arms and yell at Tesla. The particularly sort of satisfying thing about a Tesla takedown protest is that like they're at the dealership, sort of you're standing in front of it, and the movement's developed enough that, if there is going to be a takedown protest, the cops are there. So there were 5 cops, one for every 5 to 10 people, it seemed like.
LAPD using those resources wisely. Thanks, guys.
You know, there was a guy who obviously kind of wasn't really planning to show up to the protest, but he was a little out of it and wouldn't stand on the sidewalk, and they put him in cuffs. I started gently and politely standing up for this guy, and they start putting their hands on me. It's just like
well, haven't you heard, Brian? Tesla protesters are domestic terrorists now. So
right. And Trump and Elon are, quote, coming after us. They're going to go after them. I mean, this is where we are now.
But you can see, like, the fact that they are saying those things shows you just how scared Elon Musk is of these people going after the brand and how vulnerable he knows that the brand is to public sentiment shifting on the auto company, because so much of its valuation, like we were talking about with Ed Niedermeyer, so much of its valuation, so much of what keeps it going is reputation. And not just the reputation of the brand, but the reputation of Elon Musk himself. And so the more that gets tarnished, that the fundamentals of the business are not there. So it gets in real trouble, as we've seen, right, with the share price declining and all that kind of stuff. I just saw a story earlier that in Europe, obviously we've been talking about how Tesla sales are like way down there. BYD sales, the Chinese EV company, despite the tariffs, continuing to increase, and EV sales overall are doing the same, but Tesla sales are continuing to decline. I think it'll be interesting to see what the Q1 results are going to be from Tesla and what's going to be reflected there. Actually, I just wanted to pick up on something you were saying about the protest too. Is this past Saturday was like a big day for the protest where they were really making a concerted effort to get people out, but people haven't been out yet. These protests do continue in many parts of the United States and the wider world. And if you haven't been out to one and you want to, you should definitely check out TeslaTakedown.com. I believe the URL is. See what's going on near you and meet some fellow anti-Elon folks.
I will say the other thing that is different that has happened is that the first early ones were like truly sort of just a lot of solidarity and good vibes, and people were honking in support. But it's also sort of emboldened the far right and folks like the Proud Boys who sort of delight in going to counter protests and showing up. So they're starting to work to try to chill some of the organizing. And there was no organized counter protests where I was, but there were a few Tesla drivers driving by and sort of like stopping and like really giving the finger and yelling out and like sort of like this.
That's so funny.
Yeah, it was really funny. Some guy stopping in traffic, everybody's honking at him, and he's just like got his finger up. Blah, blah, blah.
I've seen plenty of Teslas down here in Auckland, but when I arrived, one of the first things I saw was a Tesla with a sticker on the back saying "Anti-Elon Tesla Club." It's like, well, you should still get rid of your Tesla, but I guess at least you're doing that.
One of the guys there at the protest was like, he was like waving his Tesla keychain, just show that like I am a Tesla owner and I hate what he's doing. So it's definitely taking that form too.
I was listening to Canadian media the other day, not to dwell on this. I know we want to move on to something else. But they were talking about the stickers that they saw in Tesla near them. And I was like, man, this sticker sounds so Canadian. The bumper sticker is, "Sorry, guys, I just wanted an electric car." I was like, of course the Canadians are saying sorry on the back of their Teslas. Like,
a polite declination.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's so much going on with Tesla. But I know we also wanted to talk about something else because we've been talking about Elon for the past few weeks. And there's kind of this ongoing saga, obviously, with OpenAI, the standard bearer for the AI revolution that we now find ourselves in, supposedly, where there's this story that it has closed this funding round.
It has finalized a $40 billion funding round and valued the company at $300 billion.
Bubble alerts are going off everywhere.
I mean, it's pretty unprecedented. Friend of the show, Ed Zitron, I think just like blew a coronary, just like when this, it must have, because this is so wild. I mean, SoftBank is a big part of this, shoveling billions into the pot as well. And SoftBank famously has been involved in a lot of like WeWork before it, a lot of
SoftBank loves a good bubble. Yeah,
it loves a good bubble. Is often thought of as the kiss of death.
Doesn't always know when to get out on the bubbles.
Yeah, kiss of death, SoftBank. But like this, I mean, we're now in like a totally new, uncharted waters here because this is the largest funding round I think ever made, $40 billion. I think that the last one, which was a fraction of this, which happened last fall, was until that point also the largest funding round. And it was something like only like $6 or $7 billion. We're getting like exponential, astronomical. It's truly wild. And it's truly, truly wild that nothing has fundamentally changed in that time frame, right? Like
Exactly.
OpenAI has not demonstrated a great new business model. It's still losing money on every single ChatGPT search. It's still losing money with its compute, with its energy costs. It's still sort of immensely expensive in its labor costs, its research costs, all of the above. And it's starting to find a foothold here and there, kind of, but it's nothing that would ever justify a $300 billion valuation in any other circumstance, right? It's truly wild. As you mentioned, bubble alert, right? So like on one hand, the risk is that now if this house of cards comes down, then it takes a lot more with it as sort of just the numbers keep going higher and higher up and more different businesses sort of get attached to it or dependent on it. You know, the bubble could burst, but also it's just like where we're at. It's crazy. I mean, Uber was crazy for one thing, for getting billions of dollars of investment before it was profitable for years and years, but it was never anything like this.
Well, and even as you say that, right, like we do continue to see more warnings of a bubble. The end of last month, Alibaba's chairman Joe Tsai, I might be butchering the pronunciation of his surname there, but was basically also warning of a bubble, in particular around all the data centers that are being built out in order to power this, generative AI boom or whatever, and what is ultimately going to come of it. I feel like one of the things that really stood out to me about the OpenAI story, because I feel like it picks up on something that we were talking about in months past, in particular around what Elon Musk has been trying to do in order to stifle OpenAI's bid to become a private company and to restructure away from being a nonprofit and to become a full kind of for-profit entity. And Elon Musk has been trying to stop that from happening, basically. Maybe one of the only good things that he has been doing lately. You know, as part of this funding round, as you were saying, they are raising $40 billion, but it was reported in CNBC and I'm sure other places that if they are not able to restructure as a private company by December 31st of this year, then that funding round will actually drop from $40 billion to $30 billion because SoftBank's contribution would drop from $30 billion to $20 billion. So like most of the money in this funding round is coming from SoftBank, but they would be contributing a lot less if the company does not become a for-profit entity by the end of the year. And I think it's still very much up in the air as to whether that ultimately happens.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really interesting question, and it's yet another one of those things. I mean, we're kind of starting to like accumulate little triggers or potential triggers that might serve to unwind the bubble or set it to bursting in the worst case. We saw like the blip with DeepSeek, and then like the Microsoft. Interestingly, like the sleeper news of late has been like Microsoft sort of canceling data center contract. Like made some headlines when it did it the first time, but it's continued to do that. Even last week, Microsoft canceled some more like 2 gigawatts worth of data centers.
Yeah, I think it was like options that it had on projects or something like that.
Yeah, and it declined not to do them. So they're kind of like sending these soft signals that, we don't know where all this is going. It seems to me like kind of trend-wise that AI has uses to which it is put or is being tried to be put to by the companies selling it have somewhat sort of become entrenched, right? Like it's being used by students to cheat on homework, right? It's being used to try to produce some output in, the enterprise domain with like writing marketing emails or producing images for corporate slideshows and stuff like that.
Yeah, churning out stupid PR emails that I have to delete from my inbox because I'm not interested in your product. Thanks.
Yeah. And it's being used still, I think, occasionally. And I think this will be the next thing we talk about, I believe, the Studio Ghibli stuff.
Before we talk about that, can I just mention one more point on what you're talking about and then we can dig into that? You were talking about Microsoft and the data center leases and the options and stuff and them not moving forward with that. And I just wanted to point out one more piece of that I think kind of fits into this picture that you're painting, which I think is rather interesting and probably is one that we've not been paying as much attention attention to because we're so focused on what's happening in like North America and Europe. But there was this story in MIT Technology Review end of last month, basically talking about how there was this massive data center building spree in China as well. And it's already been recognized that it was massively overbuilt. There's a ton of data centers that were constructed that are just empty and being, not used right now. And so I think that that also kind of plays into this recognition that there is this overbuilding here and this questioning as to like, what is the consequence of it? These companies are still getting these huge valuations, as you're talking about. Obviously, there's questions as to how viable all of that is, but we're seeing a growing number of signs that something is not going right here. And I think the question that remains is just like, at what point do the investors force some kind of shift that actually reflects that in the markets, in the share prices, in the funding rounds, and those sorts of things? And we haven't seen that shift yet. And I think one of the things that probably stands out to me is that we think about the critics who have been looking at this for a while is that, I think that there have been a number of different points where we've predicted that, okay, this bubble is probably going to implode here. And then it has continued. Yeah. And I think that there are reasons for that. Like, I think that there are reasons why it's continued if you dig into it. It's not like, you just got it wrong, you didn't predict it properly. It's like, no, there have been things that have been happening here to try to keep the bubble inflated because they don't want to see it collapse. And I think that changes with the Trump administration have clearly helped to continue to inflate it and to keep it going a little bit longer. Just to say that I think what's happening in China also kind of lends to this picture that you're painting that, the data center boom and the data center bubble and the larger kind of AI boom that is along with it. There's a lot of fragility there, and it's really not clear that these valuations make sense now, let alone they didn't make sense a few years ago, but they certainly don't make sense now. But it's just like, at what point does the market and the investments and the funding rounds, at what point are they going to be forced to actually realize that and reckon with that? For some reason, we're not at that point yet.
It is wild, and it is a little bit mystifying. I mean, the SoftBank thing actually does kind of make sense in that context, because it's like, historically, it has been this weird sort of late arrival with a giant wad of cash that can patch together a company that is showing some cracks in its foundation. Doing so now, though, on this scale is really interesting. Like, it is such a big, even if it doesn't get that extra, 10 billion or whatever from the restructuring, this is still just a mammoth amount of money to pledge into this idea. And I do think it speaks to a number of things. Like, I think it speaks to the narrowing of like the horizons and kind of like the poverty of imagination in Silicon Valley right now, right? Like, it's just like AI has sucked all the air out of the room, and there really just isn't much else there. So like, there is, but all the funding has been pulled into this sort of this black hole of AI it's clearly the gravitational center. There's been no other breakout trend in the last 2.5 years.
I think that that's interesting, right? Because obviously with SoftBank, it's this money that they're giving to OpenAI, but we also see them participating in this Stargate project. It's like they kind of arrived on scene out of nowhere and all of a sudden are splashing out all this money that they're almost certainly getting from like the Saudis and the Emiratis or something like that. Like it's not something that's not money that Massa is like sitting on, because we also had these stories about how he's going out and trying to find the money to to be able to spend on all this stuff. Yeah, Massa being the SoftBank chairman, thanks. But then on the other piece that you're talking about there around the imagination, like I think that is really important too, right? Because on the one hand, we see them just completely focused on AI, and AI has to be everything because they have really no ideas left. And it feels like the only piece beyond that where there's like a serious discussion happening is among these like tech fascists who are basically like, Silicon Valley lost its way, it became too consumer focused, and that is why we have no innovation today and why the power and influence of the West is declining. And what we actually need is Silicon Valley to work much more closely with the state and with the military in particular, and to not be scared about working with the military any longer, and to put our knowledge and capacities into protecting the American empire, right? And so it's like, here are your choices, like stupid AI boom that is a totally inflated bubble, all hot air, that is producing very little, if anything, of actual value and like positive output for the world. Or you can embrace this like new right-wing nationalist project that is about defending American hegemony as it is a declining power and making sure the tech industry profits a whole lot as it's doing that. And it's like, pick your direction, and they both suck.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's true. And it's like, but it's the crazy thing is like, we're even entering the territory now where like these would have to be some massive military contracts to, if a consumer base doesn't materialize, in a meaningful way. Because, like, what would OpenAI even do?
But, like, look at them. Like, because, a lot of these arguments are coming from, like, the Palantir folks. And they are, like, looking at that, what is it, $800 billion Pentagon budget. And they're like, give me Daddy Trump. Like, I just want a piece. Like, just give me a bit, and we're so great right now. And they're gonna get it. Like, it's just like, how much are they gonna get?
One of the mysteries to me so far is that OpenAI has sort of maintained its trajectory even in the face of sort of Elon Musk's opposition. That sort of says some interesting things about the sense of where people think power lies. So maybe there are people in the valley or even within the state who aren't putting all their eggs into Elon Musk, and it's another sign that maybe his position is just, a little bit more tenuous than it might be assumed to be, since he's still like center stage, waving his child around the White House and doing all of that.
I agree with you, but it still does feel like the Republican Party and the Trump piece of this is dependent on Elon Musk to a degree where it would be difficult to scapegoat him or to expel him from the project.
Oh, 100%. 100%. It's just like this like undercurrent where it's like, we're going to still like bet on OpenAI as well, even though Elon Musk like fucking hates OpenAI. Like there's other horse. I mean, OpenAI doesn't really have a ton of super meaningful contracts with the state yet. It's been in the orbit, and I do think that there's something with the Defense Department that it's got, but it's not like a major part of its business yet. The other thing that I'll say is that for over a year now, I've had this framework and this theory that I sort of argued in this report that I did for AI Now about how OpenAI uses the AGI term in particular, like uses artificial general intelligence as like its sort of trump card when it needs to sort of like raise a bunch of capital, or when it needs to change a news cycle if it's getting bad press or something.
Are you sure you're not just an AGI that I created to talk to on a podcast?
It's like I'm agentic. I'm not an AGI. I'm just an agentic.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, I'm merchant AI.
I couldn't get a good enough one. I had to settle for the specifically trained as a podcast host to talk about technology.
Yeah, you can't afford the $200,000 a month tier or whatever it is. But
no, I'm certainly not making that much.
But the point is so I went back and I charted like, when does OpenAI use this language? And it's like, oh, when it needs to like raise $10 billion from Microsoft, like, oh, we're building AGI, or when there's like a wrinkle in the Scarlett Johansson flare up when they were in trouble for using a voice that sounded suspiciously like hers. Oh, we're doing AGI. I got to charted it out. And sure enough, this is the line. This is the headline of the press release. I'm going to read it just so I have it right. New funding to build towards AGI. Like, that's OpenAI's headline. And then they're like, kind of making no big deal about it. Otherwise, 40 billion, 300 billion post-money valuation, they say, that's what today we're announcing this new funding. We're excited to be working in partnership with SoftBank Group. Few companies understand how to scale the transformative technology like they do. Yeah, ask WeWork about that.
Yeah.
Their support will help us continue building AI systems that drive scientific discovery, enable personalized education, enhance human creativity, and pave the way toward AGI that benefits all of humanity. Time and again, this is the message that they're sending out there. We've got AGI on the horizon. There's been a bunch of AGI discourse lately. It is sort of like this North Star that they can tap into as a funding mechanism. And they're leaning even harder on it, I think, this time than they have in certain times in the past, because their position is in many ways more tenuous. Like, it is a lot like the logic of Elon Musk, right? Like we talked on earlier in the episode, you have to make up a new story, or you have to keep flogging the old one, or keep finding new ways to like bellow it out of a megaphone. Yeah, it's kind of what OpenAI is doing too. Rather than like find a business model to fund this stuff, they're just like telling the story over and over and over. And this is as big as they could go. I could always be proven wrong. Maybe the next year we'll see $100 billion funding round direct from the Saudi oil wells. But who knows? It's certainly inflationary, and certainly like a lot could go wrong here.
Then we'll really be getting close to AGI, because remember that leaked report from sometime last year where it was like Microsoft and OpenAI have agreed that AGI is when their AI products make $100 billion in profit.
I love it. At the end of the, like in OpenAI's charter, it's just like AGI is when we can do economically valuable work that a human can do. So it's like it can just like replace a human job. And then it's like, oh yeah, and then AGI is also when we've generated this much revenue. All this like highfalutin talk about super intelligence and these beings, it's really just like quite plain to see what they're actually doing if you even just like take a second and drill into their own language.
Yeah, it's so wild, man. I know there was another part of this that you wanted to talk about. I know that you wrote about it this week or last week, or I don't know, the days are blurred
once
together
again,
to
the
me.
time vortex swirls on. Yeah.
Totally. But, this is the Studio Ghibli stuff. I don't know. We were talking about this before the show. Maybe we're mispronouncing it. Maybe we're not. Who knows what the right pronunciation is? I'm sure that I'm joking. I know there are people, but I'm saying Studio Ghibli. I feel like this whole thing was like not on my radar at all because I'm basically never on Twitter anymore. I check into Blue Sky and I kind of leave. And so I was just like doing my little thing on Blue Sky, having a fine time over there. And then I just started seeing all these people posting about, oh my God, everyone's posting OpenAI Studio Ghibli images. And I was like, I don't see them. Where are they, guys? And it's like, oh, apparently it's all over Twitter. But over here, I don't see a thing other than the people coming over from Twitter to be like, oh my God, they're being posted everywhere.
Apparently it was on Blue Sky too.
I'm sure it was still there. But at least, like I'm using my little non-algorithmic feed of just the people I follow. And like, like it was not in my little bubble, which I know is the criticism of Blue Sky that we're all in our little bubbles. But listen, I like my little bubble. Okay.
Yeah. Let Paris have his little bubble.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it was same, actually kind of same. I think I was actually logging on to X to post something else, and I just got hit by all of it like a tsunami of shit right in the face, because it was inescapable there. Are
you watching White Lotus?
I am watching White Lotus.
When you said tsunami, all I heard was what's her name? Parker Posey saying tsunami. And like, I don't know. I just laughed internally. Sorry. I completely interrupted your thought process because I had to say that. You mentioned the word tsunami. And then after that, I zoned out until I interrupted you. So yeah.
Tsunami.
Well, it's good to know that we have like this safe word that if we need you to disassociate, things are getting too intense.
You'll just say
you can
tsunami.
Just say tsunami and
just
picture Parker Posey and go to your happy place. Good. X is still obviously where all of like the sort of like the Silicon Valley and the AI diehards live. It's just,
Well, it's the everything app. So
it's the everything app, and generative AI has, as it has been convincingly argued, we'll throw the essay in the show notes, the aesthetics of fascism.
Well, and they also have the best AI, Grok, right? So
world's top tier AI, Grok. It's so funny that Musk like owns X just so like he can like force that to be part of the conversation. It's just like he's like, well, also there's Grok. Like I feel like no one would even know that Grok existed if it were.
Well, and the other big story of like the past week was Elon Musk selling X to XAI to just like
just like
do
a
some
snake
financial
eating
engineering or
tail.
there.
Yeah. Everybody's like, wait, you can just do that? You could like just sell. Yeah, it's
they're private companies. Like I guess so, right? Like,
can you just sell the other one to the other one next? It's just some sort of a tax scheme. So the losses.
I'm sure it's like those Russian dolls where like you're just trying to.
Well, and that, to bring it back full circle, is why I like Tesla, because like Tesla is the biggest doll. Like it is holding all of them because it has the biggest value, because investors have pumped so much money into it, even though it's not even a crazy successful company.
And the money for
revenue.
so many of these other companies is like loans against Tesla stock.
Yeah.
So Elon Musk can keep doing all this other shit.
It is. Yeah. So that's the central insight of the protest, is if you take that down, the house of cards can start falling down. Anyways.
Sorry, I keep interrupting your attempts to make a point about Studio Ghibli and no AI. See, this is what real human conversation is like. You'll never get this from an AI.
Yeah. Scattered, points half made and abandoned, off,
I feel like we're particularly all over the place this episode, but like it's good. I like it.
It's what makes us human. Yeah.
Yeah.
The AIs can't use this in their training data. This is training data proof nonsense. By design, I might add. We plan for 12 digressions at least per point in episode. It's written into our show notes. Yeah, which is to say that the place was overrun by, this new meme. You've probably seen it if you've been on the internet at all. And that's that OpenAI. And once again, this speaks largely to sort of, I think it reflects a lot on the company that it's like most notable new features are just sort of like ripping off an old style of artwork. So you basically, OpenAI announced a new image feature that was integrated directly into ChatGPT. I think as of today, as we're recording, that it is now available for everybody. So you could do this if you are so inclined. Please don't. But you can like turn any image into, another image in a different style. And it's gotten more sophisticated in organizing those images. So you can, make a little comic panel, or you can sort of say, as literally thousands of people were doing, take this picture and make it in the style of Studio Ghibli. People have done this before, as a lot of people pointed out, but it really hit critical mass this time because, as most AI slop, it's like good enough. Like, you get it. You see it. Like, someone posts a vacation photo in the style of Studio Ghibli and you're like, okay, yeah, that's that. And then people started posting, like graphic news images in the style of Studio Ghibli. And then, pretty soon, like Elon Musk posted one of like himself as Simba of the Lion King for some reason in the style of Studio Ghibli. And then, worst of all, the White House official account posted,
oh my God, yes.
Jesus. An image of like an immigration officer arresting a migrant who was sobbing in the style of Studio Ghibli. For the author of the essay on AI as the aesthetics of fascism, you're done. Like, your point was just made for you. Like, you are correct. That's the end of that. And it, the whole, as trends do these days, it went from 0 to 180 in miles per hour in like just like a few hours.
Yeah, and by like this time next week, it'll be like never happened. Moved on to something else,
Totally ephemeral, totally wafting in the wind. But what's particularly notable about this, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Studio Ghibli, the animation studio that's behind, beloved classics like My Neighbor Totoro, Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, so on and so forth. They're great. I have young children, so I've been watching them and I love them because they're just like not a Despicable Me sequel, first and foremost. They are like just actually great transporting films, and they are notoriously meticulously handcrafted, animated over the course of many, many years with great pain and process. And Hayao Miyazaki is sort of well known in AI and AI critical circles for this video clip that circulated, and it sort of is shown like an AI demo. This is before OpenAI, so many years back, much cruder. And they ask him what he thinks of it, and he gives the famous line. He calls it disgusting. And then he says, this is an insult to life itself, which is as hard as you can go, really, in AI criticism.
But it's like, I feel like the thing that is key about that, and so key to understand, because it's like so human, is there is that line, right, that everyone seizes on. But I think the context is so important there too, because he's being shown this AI demo of like this kind of man in all these different positions and like scraping along on the ground. When Miyazaki sees that, he like thinks of this good friend that he has who has a disability, and he's just like disgusted that people would use AI and digital graphics and stuff to create something like this and have like really no issue with it. And he tells these people who are there to demo it, he says, thinking of him in reference to his friend, I can't watch this stuff and find it interesting. And then he like kind of goes on a bit and he says, I'm utterly disgusted. If you really want to make creepy stuff, you can go ahead and do it. I would never wish to incorporate this technology into my work at all. I strongly feel that this is an insult to life itself. I just think it picks up on this broader point, right, of humanity, and how so much of that humanity feels like it is so often lost when we move into this realm of dealing with generative AI and what have you.
When you move to automate it.
But like when you're talking about that thing that the White House put out, and it's like, it's so fucking evil. They just don't care at all.
We can use this this generator to make somebody feel bad, make a joke out of it, broadcast it as partly a warning, partly to take part in this trend where we're gleefully appropriating somebody else's work who would hate to see this, and we don't care. And we're wrapping this all up into this big bundle of fuck you, and we're just launching it out into the world. That's why, like, it's so loaded, this interview. It's only a few minutes long, but he's got all of these great lines. And every once in a while, someone will come along and say, like, are you just talking about just that specific CGI? And like, no, because they drill into it. And then another Studio Ghibli producer kind of asks them, and it's like, what do you want to do with this? Like, why would you make this thing that can, you know, automate? And then he says, well, I guess we want to make it so humans don't have to do this art. And then that's ultimately what just sort of shocks Miyazaki. And then the last shot of that scene is that he's by himself. And what I think he says, I feel like we are nearing the end of times. We humans are losing faith in ourselves. This is about so much more than just this one clip that sucked. It's about this idea that you would want to take away the pain and experiencing that pain and putting it into art and then actually meaningfully expressing something. Because if we can't do that, then he's saying we've lost what it means to be human.
Yeah, and it's staggering too, like watching that clip, because the guys who are there demoing it to Miyazaki, like when they see that his response is so negative, they're just like shocked. Like it seems like the notion that anyone could possibly have a problem with what they have done has like never occurred to them before in their life. And now they're sitting in front of this guy who is like
so
legend. Influential, who they certainly like look up to immensely. And he's just like completely disgusted by what they have done and like has no qualms in saying it straight to their face. And it's like, you almost wish that some of these people working in the AI industry could even feel the degree of shame that you see on these folks who are speaking to Miyazaki, because it seems quite clear that they do not feel that one bit.
Honestly, that's what sort of like made me write this post, which I wrote it, and it's honestly, it's turned out to be the most popular article that I've written for my newsletter so far. It's like, it's the number one. It's been shared everywhere, but I just wrote it in a couple of hours in like a fit of anger, because I had been talking to some artists who were also angry about it, also upset about it, including Reed Southern, who's a great artist and sort of advocate for artist rights, who's quite active on X and Blue Sky. We'll have to get Reed on the show sometime. He shared some great thoughts with me, and that, so I wrapped that up, and it made me so angry that so many of these AI boosters, obviously a lot of people don't know the full context, and they're just playing along with a trend. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the guys who know Miyazaki's against this, and they're putting it out there, almost as like a literal fuck you sometimes. I mean, when I shared my critical piece, I got a bunch of mentions from folks in the AI community who were like, just quite literally, one of them was just fuck Miyazaki, or just like, he's had his day in the sun, like, like he's the past, like who cares what he thinks, literally who cares what the artists think, as they are taking this work or endorsing the taking of this work and the transmuting of it into a soulless amalgam of content output, so that they can have a meme game on Twitter, or worse, to use it in materials that otherwise would have been put to a human artist or given to a human artist, and then eroding the market for artistic work in general. And so like, yeah, there was a real moral dimension. I'm pretty like I'm pretty numb to a lot of the shit that I see online, but this one did have a real moral component to me, and as I know it did with a lot of other artists. This is what it's for, right? Like this is this is what OpenAI is giving us. It's not giving us great new art. It's not giving us great new potentialities. It's seeking to automate labor that could otherwise be done by people and do it worse. It's like allowing sort of corporations and some editorial directors to just use AI generated art instead of people's work, crushing like the standards in the process. So it's slop, and I think nobody's saying that this stuff is better than people, or that we would prefer to have more of this on the internet, more of this in our lives. It's just because it's cheaper. So it's cheapening. It's enabling the mass production of content, and it's giving authoritarians tools to just automatically shit out their own messaging, their own contributions to these soulless trends, furthering sort of this philosophy, this sort of reminiscent of like the futurists, the fascist futurists from 100 years ago, where it's just kind of just like, let's break with the old, or even in some ways it's even worse. Let's take the old, shove it into our generator, and then claim what comes out as our own. Doesn't give a shit what happens before that, or, you know, the livelihoods or the well-being of the people who we're stealing from. Yeah, I just think it's such a grim sort of encapsulation of what's bad about generative AI in the industry right now.
No, I think so well said, right? And particularly to like pick the aesthetic of Studio Ghibli and the work of Miyazaki, when you know how he feels about AI and this kind of stuff, and when you know how beloved his work is, I think it completely speaks to what is going on there. And I think what you've said is totally spot on. I know that we had a few final stories we wanted to touch on before we wrap up this week's episode.
Yeah, lightning round.
Yeah, we'll pop into those really quickly. All right, so the first story here that we'll mention is about TikTok content moderators in Turkey. You know, we've heard about content moderators in a lot of different parts of the world right now. We specifically paid attention broadly to these content moderators in Kenya over the past few years. You know, they were doing work on OpenAI, but have also done work for Facebook and things like that, and have been organizing in recent years because of their treatment. Well, there was this interesting story in the Bureau of Investigative Journalism by Niamh McIntyre about TikTok content moderators who were hired in Turkey by a Canadian company called TELUS Digital. But when they tried to unionize because of, you know, how they were treated at work and those sorts of things, they were, of course, fired. And now they are suing over that in Turkey because, you know, rightfully so, they don't think that they should be fired for unionizing. And I think just the one thing I would add there, you know, I think it's a story we've seen time and time again, is TELUS was actually formerly a public telecom company in Canada. And now a few decades after privatization, we see the kind of shit that they are up to. So it's particularly gross for me.
Delightful. Yes, video game workers have authorized a strike at Microsoft-owned ZeniMax Media. This was notable. Well, it's notable for a lot of reasons. First, because Microsoft got some goodwill, including some tentative goodwill from myself even included, because they announced that they would not interfere with any efforts to organize at the company or at subsidiaries. Now, this happened around the same time that Microsoft was trying to negotiate the acquisition of Activision Blizzard, and it was facing pushback on the antitrust front. So it's just a huge acquisition. And so this was almost kind of a little fig leaf that they extended, saying, hey, look, well, you know, if workers want to organize, they can organize at our company, as kind of a hedge against sort of any accusations that they might then be able to use their new power to sort of fire people and sort of erode working standards, which they did. You know, they almost immediately, they still, after the acquisition was approved, they did fine. But that's neither here nor there. So ZeniMax was an early one to organize their quality assurance testers, and they're represented by the CWA, the Communication Workers of America. They, you know, voted to organize, and Microsoft did not, good on its word, in, you know, prevent that or push back on it or try to union bust. However, when they tried to actually get a contract, and this is as somebody who's been in this process multiple times before can attest, getting the contract is often the sticking point where it gets really hard because it's not as in the headlines as much. Microsoft has basically refused to come to the table. And now it's been 2 years. They don't have a contract, which basically means they haven't had any gains despite voting to unionize. So Microsoft has prevented that by coming to the table in good faith. And finally, ZeniMax has, you know, said, well, I guess we're going to have to go on a strike. All power to ZeniMax and to the workers. Solidarity out there. Good luck to you. Microsoft, go to the table. Go to the table. Bargain in good faith.
And what you said is like the key point there, right? That Microsoft got so much goodwill out of saying they were going to not get in the way of workers unionizing. And this was used explicitly to help with the Activision Blizzard merger and, you know, to get groups like the Communications Workers of America to say good things about that potential merger. Now they turn around, unsurprisingly, and say, okay, yeah, you can form your union, but we're not going to give you a contract. Come on. Just recently, of course, up here in Canada, we saw how this kind of played out, where in Quebec, Amazon warehouse workers formed a union at the warehouse in Laval, which is just north of Montreal. And because explicitly in Quebec labor law, it says that companies need to negotiate a contract with workers when they form a union, Amazon shut down every single warehouse in the entirety of the province of Quebec to ensure that they would not have to follow through on that. So you can see how these companies work, basically, is what I'm saying.
It's not just even tech companies. It's just, this is with a corporate playbook. The entire time I was at the LA Times, we were overdue a new contract and the union was trying to negotiate in good faith. So I was there from 2022 to 2024. Like that was almost like it's been, and they still don't have one now. So it's been years, and really common tactic, really awful. Everybody do what you can to support the striking ZeniMax workers. Go get it.
Absolutely. And there's a whole other thing there we could talk about other developments with video game unions. Maybe we'll talk about that next week or something, but I think it's worth digging into further when we have a bit more time. Brian, we have one more story. Did you want to take that one?
Yeah, there's been some reports that Google Overview, Google's AI tool, the AI overview that, you Google something and it just sort of vomits up a bunch of always accurate, take it all to heart, especially if you're Googling which mushrooms to eat. Just do exactly what it says. It's still wrong so much. It's still one of my favorite recent stories was Google released this report that was AI Overview is the most successful product we've ever had. More people are using it. And it's yeah, because every time you Google everyone's search results. You are a monopoly that control 90% of the search market. And whenever anybody searches using Google, they get Google AI Overview, whether or not they want it. That's a big success. But that's what you can do when you have a monopoly. But anyways, there are reports coming out that traffic is declining to publishers and to websites. There's a couple different ones on this, actually. Alex Kantrowitz at Big Technology interviewed the publisher of an encyclopedia online that has seen traffic tank, I think 25%. And it's really common to say AI is theft, but I don't know how you argue otherwise, because Google is basically functionally this is what's happening, is that it's taking the text of a website, maybe with some flourishes or whatever, but for all intents and purposes, just vomiting that up when you Google it instead and publishing it on its platform, obviating the need for you to actually click through to the publisher who actually spent the time researching and writing and publishing the work. So Google is just publishing that via Overview, taking that work and then selling ads against it. I would consider that ad revenue stolen. The value has been effectively stolen by Google, and that's happening across the web. I'm actually starting to work on a story that's talking to some folks who are experiencing this in real time. So more on that soon.
What you're describing there, it brings to mind how a number of governments around the world have passed these laws expecting Google and kind of these digital ad companies to pay money to news publishers. And it's it further bolsters, the point that is being made there, as they're explicitly robbing the traffic for their AI overviews and stuff. But just to pick up on what you were saying, there's also this graph in a Bloomberg story published at the end of March, where they look at the estimated monthly aggregate traffic to 20 websites that were invited to Google's web creator conversation event in October. And it just shows since the end of 2023, the traffic to those websites has just gone completely off a cliff. Yeah, it's just wild to see this stuff.
What we're witnessing happen, it's of a feather with the Studio Ghibli stuff. Our ability to support and fund, the creation of original stuff, of original writing, reporting, art is just being gobbled up, right? Is being eaten away at by the AI companies that are appropriating this stuff into their own apps, their own, features and systems. They shrug their shoulders and say, "Oh, well, we need it." It would be too cumbersome to engineer a system that could actually give compensation or demand consent from people. But the end result is that they just get all that stuff for free, and now they get to profit off of it.
Again, it's a much bigger point than what we can get into right now, but this is also why I find the argument that we should just consider any scraping of the internet for AI training to be fair use, like completely beyond the pale. Like, I don't think you can actually justify it in my view. But again, that's a whole bigger discussion.
Yeah, I mean, because we're at the beginning stages. From here on out, it's just there are going to be fewer people who can make a living creating original human-made stuff, more people jamming that prompt button and getting output that is derived from the old original stuff, and it's just going to continue to flood the webs. So it's looking grim right now, and we're going to need an intervention, like unlikely to happen in the next couple of years, but we shall see. There's much to do, much to plan for, much to resist as the system.
As you say, hammers up.
Yeah, hammers up. That's right. Get your hammers. Get your proverbial hammers up.
System Crash is hosted by Paris Marks and Brian Merchant. Production is by Eric Wickham. Our theme music is Dystopia by our good friends in Yacht. Support the show on patreon.com/systemcrashpod to get a monthly bonus episode.